Hello again, everybody, and welcome to WrestleLine. This is the Diesel Part 3. I'm your host, John Scott, joined as always by my co-host, which is Matt Essex. And Matt, how you doing as we now blaze into 1996 with Diesel? How you doing anyway, mate?
Yeah, I'm doing well and can't wait to see where this roller coaster ride ends with the ups and downs that has been in his career so far.
Absolutely. Just to recap a little summary of where we came off from. Don't forget, folks, if you want to go back and listen to the entire thing and you've only just picked us up this week, we've done Part 1 and Part 2 already of the Diesel timeline, but you can go back on them in our archives, along with the other wrestlers that we've covered so far as well. But coming off of Part 2 in 1995 saw a real rise for Diesel. He was the WWF champion. He'd gone through a lot of bouts against pretty much the monsters were thrown in his way. I'm going to say most of them were quite arguably terrible, and those matches didn't really work. And then, of course, Diesel finds himself without the title, and of course he loses it to Bret Hart. But rolling into 1996 now, Matt, and this is, of course, it's not this is the year, of course, that he leaves, but I think what's important is how we get to it and where we're at and all the rest of it. So let's dive straight into January now. We're in January 15th of the Wrestling Observer, and the house show circuit is pretty much, Diesel is now up against the likes of Goldust. He's wrestling him. Yes, he's winning the matches, but he is quite some way down the card, even on house show standards. He's also doing matches where he's teaming up with Razor Ramon, and they're beating the likes of Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Jeff Jarrett in tag matches. So that's kind of the circuit of matches that he's having on. Matt, just to talk Diesel where he's at this point of his career, obviously, do you feel like WWF at this point, now he's been the champion, but do you feel like they've, the investment is still with him, that he can still be, because he's arguably a name now, he's definitely, regarded as a top guy, but do you feel like they dropped the ball slightly here with him, or do you think there's still, further down the line, there is still room for, Diesel to, reclaim his main spot on that roster?
Yeah, it does feel like their plans have changed slightly for him. It feels like a definite step down into the mid-card era. I wonder if they just too wrapped up on now what they're going to do with Bret Hart, which is really what a lot of people would have hoped to have seen sooner. Yeah. But they're just giving majority of their plans to him rather than Diesel. So it might not have lasted for that long, but I feel at this phase they really didn't know what to do with the guy.
Sure. Okay, well, first fun fact to this episode is that Tom Pritchard's name was changed from Flip to Zip. References at the taping to Flip were talked over in commentary. They wrestled the Guns for the tag team titles over the weekend and would win the match, but then they have the decision reversed and the match restarted and they lose. So there you go. Not exactly the most fascinating of news, but I found it. They would make that huge adjustment, Matt. Flip to Zip, massive difference, of course, and I'm sure it made all the difference in his career going forward. This is interesting, Matt, because when we spoke about some of the mentions of awards coming off of in Part 2, of course, I think Diesel had got it for most improved. This one he gets for most unimproved wrestler, along with the likes of Lex Luger and Hulk Hogan are up there. Matt, do you think that's a fair comment, or a fair thing at this point when we reflect on the year he had, and of course for most of it he was the top guy? Is that a fair assessment that he was the most unimproved, or do you think that's slightly unfair?
I would say that it's true, but at the same time slightly unfair, because when we think back to the previous episode and the matches we were talking about during that, he was fighting the likes of people like Sid and Mabel. It's hard to hone your skills against people like that. There's not going to be much give in their matches. It'll be very stiff, and big man versus big man. You're not going to be seeing his best skills coming out of the guy. So he was in a difficult spot at that time.
Yeah, I feel it's slightly harsh for Diesel at this point. I mean, I know where they're coming from on this, and of course, this was voted. By the way, this is not a singular, a singular thought process. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's just how people saw it. He also would wrap up at number 3 in the most overrated of that year as well. He was behind Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger. Pretty much the same mentions that were in the most unimproved are also the most overrated. And I guess that's a fair comment to make, considering, especially I think for Diesel, where he was positioned in the company. Maybe that's a fair comment. Going forward now, more house shows, and they're still reporting the likes of Diesel teaming up with Razor Ramon, beating Helmsley and Jeff Jarrett. That goes on all the way through into the Canadian tour that they're doing on the house shows. And it's worth pointing out as well that in Montreal they did the cage match for the WWF title, where Bret, of course, beat Diesel. That match got just under 3 stars. They ran that match for a few towns in and around that weekend, both getting sort of, in cages, by the way, and I guess that was their kind of way of doing the rematch, I guess, the clause or whatever was going to be done on the house shows. So Meltzer reports most of the big houses were down and drawn mainly by Bret and Diesel cage matches. Same finish where Bret climbs over the top. A split second before Diesel goes out the door. In some cities they announce Diesel as champ before reversing it, and Diesel is then told to hand the belt to Bret, and he clocks Bret over the head with it. In most cities the crowds are about 50-50 rather than cheering for Diesel, and in some cities Bret is getting vastly the more cheered. So yeah, I think that's how they kind of got round having that off TV, that whole what happens when Diesel wants his rematch. They obviously opted for the house show circuit rather than doing it on TV. Matt, this now brings us up to TV, and of course the Royal Rumble 1996 now, and memories for this, Matt. Of course, it is what it is. But of the Royal Rumble match itself, Matt, of course, Diesel was involved heavily with Shawn Michaels, who would of course go on and win the Rumble, super kicking Diesel over the top rope just as Diesel was eliminating Karma. What did you make of this Royal Rumble, Matt? Considering he's been heavily involved in Rumbles. He's had some big spots. I remember in the first one he'd done so many eliminations, and of course at last year's he was in just the title match against Bret. But here, Matt, is there a telltale sign that okay, you're no longer the guy and you've got to put over the guy that we're going with now? Is that how it kind of come across to you?
Yeah, it definitely felt that way to me. I mean, they tried to still make him sound like a big deal when he was coming out, saying, "Oh, everyone's in trouble. This could be the winner of the Rumble."
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as he got in that ring, there was nothing really blowing anyone away. He was back to the slow Diesel, being very methodical, plodding, pacing,
Yeah.
And I didn't really see the Diesel we'd seen in the previous Royal Rumbles, where he was a credible threat and just was eliminating people left, right, centre. This was a lot more of a sort of make an appearance and let someone else take the spotlight in that ring. Because most of the time I found myself looking elsewhere for the action rather than what was going on with Diesel.
Sure, yeah, no, I agree. Now, of course, Diesel was also involved in another match that night. It would not be the end of his night, and he would, of course, interrupt during the Bret Hart Undertaker title match, where it would be Taker beating Bret essentially on the night, but only by DQ because of Diesel, who grabbed the ref and threw him out of the ring. So the ref called for a DQ. What did you make of that spot, Matt, and the whole sort of setting up for what was going to be at WrestleMania? Did you like that, or did you think it was a little bit You know, because I mean, we get to see this type of stuff. It's very common, but back then, I'm not so sure if it was as common. But when I was watching it back recently, I thought to myself, not sure I really liked that. What did you make of it, Matt?
Yeah, I can't say I really enjoyed it. You know, I think back then I did prefer it be more about the wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, there's always going to be storylines involved in it, but I think, you know, I was looking for something a lot more, especially leading up to a WrestleMania. You need to go in there thinking you're going to see a great match, and you don't want it in the back of your mind thinking, could something like that just happen again?
Yeah. No, I think I'm with you there. And of course, it was, you know, it was pretty much teased between Diesel and Undertaker. There was a lot of reports back here, Matt, that match, like when they teased it, it was seen as quite a, you know, a decent proposal. It was seen as like it had potential to have a match with someone like Diesel and the Undertaker, because I think much like Diesel in a way, Matt, that the Undertaker had his fair share of big guys to go up against as well. Giant Gonzalez being one of them, but you know, quite hard, difficult people to wrestle. So it was either going to go one way or the other, this match, I think, on paper. But they wanted to go with this one. And it was interesting to see how they were going to, you know, portray everything. But at this point, Matt, I think it's worth pointing out that they obviously wanted to make Diesel the heel here. Is that how you read into it?
Yeah, just the way he had that whole like sour grapes kind of thing.
Yeah.
The way that he was just portraying himself, like pulling them out of the ring and just like and making the match in disqualification. Like, it doesn't matter what the fans think. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're getting all those vibes coming through him at this point.
Yeah, no, totally with you. Okay, so I want to go now to just right at the end of January here, and they are still doing the matches in the cage between Brett and Diesel, and this is now getting better. So by doing it so many times has really gone off well. They're doing slightly different endings. This is the house show circuit, of course. And I think that it's gone so well that come In Your House, which is in the middle of course, this Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, they are going to have the match between Bret Hart and Diesel, essentially the rematch from Survivor Series where Bret had won. But of course they kept that going for quite some time there, Matt, and then obviously deciding, okay, we'll have it here as well. Now, there was another match this night, and I want to get to In Your House right now, and it was an incredible match, and I really recommend people to check this out. It was a match between Shawn Michaels and Owen Hart. It's one of those sort of like forgotten goodness, I guess. It just doesn't get a lot of mention these days, you know. I checked this out just by accident. I was really blown away because of the Wrestling Observer's reporting about it, and I thought I've got to check this out. So, for anybody that's into to Owen Hart and Shawn Michaels, these two together really do a good job. Really recommend that match at In Your House in '96, the first In Your House there. But one of the least rated matches of this night, Matt, can you guess what that is then? Yes, it's Bret Hart versus Diesel. Now, for whatever reason here, Matt, I think it probably comes down to the whole ending, but I'm sure you remember this ending, Matt. You would have seen the images. Is where the Undertaker comes up underneath the ring and grabs Diesel. It's quite an iconic image. I don't really know they've done that too many times. Of course, as Diesel was about to go out the door to win, Undertaker came from under the ring and grabbed his foot and dragged him under the ring, and special effects of smoke under the ring were through the ring, and Hart then escaped the cage to win. But there was no more sort of mention from Diesel. But of course, that was, you know, you feel like both these times he's been involved have been very storyline driven here. And I guess this is why the match, and Meltzer reports this at a 1.25 star. Not probably the worst match between the two. Yet, you know, on paper, cage match, you think to yourself, this, you know, Bret Hart can't be too bad. But I think just the ending of it just kind of spoiled everything. It seems like, you know, when we look back at Diesel, Matt, he's certainly had quite a fair few matches with Bret. Do you think that was purposely done by the company in times where they felt, you know, this is the best, you really need to work a lot, we talked about before, and this is how you get the best out of him?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case of that. But yeah, like that match though, I got to agree, it wasn't the best.